All right, how's it going, everyone? So I wanted to build upon another video that a fellow Discord user has made. Check him out, Voided Name. Go to his YouTube channel, give him a subscribe. He publishes some more advanced topics that are really good to understand, like how lower level React might work and stuff like that. But one of the videos in particular he made is trying to solve this like basic JavaScript / web development problem where you have a grid of boxes, and as you click on these boxes, you need to kind of replay the order of which you click them. So if you notice here, he is going to click a couple of boxes like this, and then it's going to replay those order with the same thing that you clicked. All right, so after you basically click all of them, replay the same order of which you clicked them and turn them back to white. So go from green to white. That's what we're going to try to build. I'm going to use vanilla.js. I believe Voided Name used React. So if you want to check out his video, he has some good examples of how to do this with React. So let's just go over to our editor. We have a index.html that we're going to be building this out with. And this is a live coding, so I'm going to be kind of solving it live. So I might do some things that aren't the most optimal. But for the most part, we need to start off with a grid. And in the problem statement, like they had a grid that looked like a C. I'm just going to do a 9x9 grid because it's just simpler in my opinion. But the main concept is like the logic behind replaying the things that you clicked. So in the body, let's just make a section. And inside of this, we could just make some divs. And I'm going to go ahead and give them a class of, I'll say tile. And then I also want to give them an ID of like 0 through 9, right? We're going to treat these as just like array indexes so we can kind of access them later. Like so, and then maybe we can kind of style this a little bit. So every tile, we're going to give a width of 100 pixels and then a height of 100 pixels and then maybe a border 1 pixel solid black. So if I go and save this and go back, we get some boxes here, looks pretty good. But now we want to put this into like a grid formation, and how to do that in code is typically you would have to wrap these things. I'll just give these like a wrapper or something. You could also probably use CSS grid if you wanted to. But in the wrapper, I'm going to go ahead and just give this a display of flex, and then I'll say flex direction is row. And I think that should put them all in the same row, so that looks a little bit better. And I'm going to do the same thing for here. Just go ahead and put a wrapper on this, and then also put a wrapper on this. I mean, there's different ways you can do this. I try with, I would do a CSS grid, but I think it'll like put spacing everywhere. So we have a 9x9 grid. And now what we want to do is we want to basically, as you click on these different things, we want to change them from clear to green. Okay, so how do we actually do that? Well, there's a couple ways. You could do an on-click listener on all of these if you wanted to. The better approach that people argue is you can actually do like a document.add event listener. So if you click anywhere in the document, you can kind of have a callback going. I'll just say on click. I think it's called click. And we can just kind of print out what we clicked here. So I'll just go ahead and say print out the event. I think we can also print out the event.target like so. So if I go to my console down here, and as I click on divs, you'll see that it prints out the actual thing that we clicked on. There's other ways you can do it as well. Like you could probably add click listeners directly to anything that has a class of title. It's kind of a little bit more involved, I believe, but I think this is the easiest approach, especially for a really basic example, right? So for right now, what we're trying to do is when you click on these boxes, how do you actually make them change the background color from white to green? So the easiest way, so inside the CSS up here, I'm just going to say tile.selected. And what this is going to do is basically any tile that also has a class of selected, I'm going to say background of green. Okay, pretty straightforward, but down here, I'm going to go ahead and do target event.target.class list dot add, and then I'm going to say green. I believe this is how you can do it. Okay, so if you look here, it actually is adding the class green here, but for some reason it's not doing anything with that. So let's go back to where we're doing the tile.selected. Oh, it's because I need to add the class of selected, not green. Okay, so now if I click on these, simple little mistake I did there, you can actually turn these things green using vanilla.js. So pretty cool. So now there's a couple things that we have to kind of do to solve this problem, right? So we need to first keep track of all the tiles that we've clicked, in what order we clicked them. And how would you do that, right? So in computer science, there's a data structure called stacks. And I believe this is a good argument of when you want to use a stack, or potentially you could use a queue, right? It doesn't really matter. But the idea is you push the elements in an order, and then you come along at the end and you can kind of pop them out in the same order that you push them onto the stack or enqueue them into the queue. So let's go ahead and try to make like a stack here, or a queue. It doesn't really matter what you want to call it. And technically a stack and a queue can just be made up with an array. So I'm going to say actually I'll do const clicked tiles is equal to an empty array. And then every time we click on a tile, we just need to push into this. So I'll say click tiles.push event.target. And then I'm going to go ahead and just console log clicked tiles. All right, so hopefully this makes sense. As you click on tiles, we are adding a selected class. We are then pushing the one we clicked into a click tiles array, and then we are going to console log that. So let's just go ahead over here, and I'm going to go ahead and just refresh the page real quick. There will be some error handling we have to do, but as I select these tiles, notice that I'm pushing which ones I selected into an array, and we can use that later on as we kind of pop those off and unselect them. All right, so now the next steps are we have to like know when do we actually select all the tiles, and there's a bunch of error handling that we need to take into consideration. Like first of all, if the user clicks on the background, we don't want to push that into the page, right? We're pushing div wrapper. That's not good. Like we don't want to push div wrapper if they click on the background. So there's some error handling we could add in. We could first of all say if event.target.classList.has, I believe, and then if it's tile. And I'm gonna say if they don't have the class of tile, then I'm gonna return. We don't want to do anything if you haven't selected the actual like tile. I might have to go back here and check. It's actually called contains, not has. So let's go ahead and change has to contains. And let's go back and refresh the page. So now when I click on the background, nothing happens. I have to actually click on a tile for it to push in. But now I have the issue, I can keep clicking the same tile over and over and over again, which is also not really desirable, right? So what we could do is in CSS, we could disable the ability to even click this tile at all, which could be useful. Or we could just say, if it's already been selected, then don't click it again. So let's just try that approach. I'm gonna say if clicked tiles.contains event.target, then I'm going to return. I don't want to be able to click on the same thing twice. So now if I do it once, actually I think it's called includes. This is why you use TypeScript, because you always forget like what the methods are. So now I can't click on the same tile multiple times, right? I can only click on new ones. Awesome. So now the last step is like when you click on the very last tile, tile 9, and you have them all green, how do you know that? Well, the easiest approach is just check how many you've clicked, right? So if tiles.length is greater than or equal to 9, then we've selected all the tiles, right? We can actually run some logic to kind of unqueue them or pop them off the stack or whatever in the same order that they are pushed in. So pushing stuff into the stack, I believe, is going to push them at the very end. You can also use shift or unshift if you wanted to do like a queue, but anyway. So let's kind of take a peek at this and kind of figure out what we need to do. So if you've selected all the tiles, if the length of the tiles is greater than or equal to 9, that's when you need to start running an operation to kind of loop through them one by one and unselect them. So let's just go ahead and do that real quick. So this one's a little bit more involved. You have to kind of understand how set intervals work in JavaScript. So I'm gonna make an interval here. So const interval is equal to set interval. And then I'm gonna go ahead and call a function. We'll do it every 1 second. So every second we need to do something. And what we need to do is we need to kind of pop off elements from this one by one until we've kind of cleared out the entire array and we can kind of start over, right? So inside the interval, I'm going to say const tile is equal to click tiles.pop. That should remove the one that we added last, but that's actually not what we want. We want to remove the first one that was pushed onto the array. So I'm actually going to do shift. Shift will remove the first element from the array. So we're pushing things onto the end, and we need to shift things off the the beginning of the array. Okay, so as this thing fires every second, what's going to happen is we're going to go ahead and just say tile.classList.remove selected. Okay. And then shift will actually remove it from the array, so we don't have to worry about like going through here and clearing stuff. But then let's just go ahead and say if we've completely cleared out this array. So if the length is 0, what we're going to do is we're going to clear this interval because we don't want this to keep firing. So I'm going to say clear interval like so and pass it that interval reference. So in JavaScript, when you call set interval, you get back this number that kind of references your interval. And then later on, you have to basically clear it, right? So the best way to visualize this is just put a debugger statement here. And that'll help us like walk through what the heck is going on. Because this is probably, if you're a beginner, this might be getting a little bit too complex to kind of understand. But if you're a mid or know anything about JavaScript, like this will be pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and click them all. I'm gonna go ahead and click the first 4 like this, and then I'm gonna work my way backwards like so. Okay, so now it fired off an interval, and then if I go through this and step through using the debugger, it's going to shift off the first thing, the first DOM element, which happens to be the first one we selected in that sequence. And then we're going to remove that selected class. So if I look at this, notice that it unhighlighted the first one we selected. And then we check if there's no more selected tiles left, we'll go and clear the interval. But in this case, we still have like 9 or 8 left, right? So let's play. And we can keep doing this over and over again. And notice that it kind of clears them out in the same order that we pushed them in. There you have it. We basically solved that issue. Let me go ahead and remove the debugger and put like a lower interval here, like 300. So let's go ahead and click through. I'll do an X like this. And then you see that it kind of unhighlights them in the exact same order that we pushed into the queue. Cool. So that's kind of the problem. I don't know if I solved it exactly like the problem statement was asked, because I believe they had a C how they described it, but I just did a 9x9 grid because it's easy enough. But that's about it. We can take this code a little bit further. So you want to stick around and watch some refactoring. I think we could make this more dynamic and not have it so hard coded on the number of tiles. But if you're so inclined, like you could actually have these things built up using like JavaScript if you wanted to, which might be a little bit better. So maybe we can try doing that and just learn something from it. Now, one thing I also realized is that we don't even need this data ID. Like, I don't know why I even put this on any of these things. Like, we don't need this at all. And I could just basically put whatever tiles I want anywhere I want. Okay, so now like same deal. The only issue is that it's hard coded to 9, which is not what we want. We want it to actually be hard coded to the number of tiles that we have. So in this case, we have like 12. So when the script runs, what we could do is we could say const number of tiles is equal to document.query selector all. And then I want to get every element that has the tile class, like so. I'll do a period in front of this and I'll look for every tile. And that's going to loop through and give me basically all 12 of these tiles. Okay. And then what I need to do is, I believe, if I'm thinking about this correctly, I can just print out the length of this. I could be wrong though. Okay. So it gives me 12. So if you do the length of this, all I need to do is just put that here. Okay. So if we selected all the tiles that are on the page, then we can do some of that countdown logic. So I'm gonna go ahead and select some of these like this and just whatever arbitrary random order, and it should kind of unselect them in the same order that we selected them. In this case, it did not actually fire off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12. So let's try to debug this. I don't know if maybe I just need to like refresh my page. But it's always good to kind of either console log or add a debugger to try to figure out what's going on, because number of tiles is a node list. Oh, I forgot to put .length here. I'm sorry. Sometimes I get too ahead of myself and like I just do stuff that's not correct. That's what we should have done. We need to get the length of all the elements we got back. Okay, so let's try it again. I'm gonna go ahead and select some weird things and see what we get back. Now I can select tiles in whatever order, and now the code is a little bit more generic and dynamic. So now I can like add tiles wherever I want to on the page. And now you might argue that like having these tiles hard-coded in the HTML is not the best. I think it's okay. But if you wanted to have a certain grid size, like let's say we wanted to const this at like grid size here is equal to 4, meaning we need like 4 by 4 tiles. which is 16 total. How could we do that? So let's go ahead and delete wrapper. I'm going to delete all these things, and we're going to kind of make this a lot more dynamic and all driven by the JavaScript itself. So let's just go ahead and do a for loop and say let I is equal to 0, I is less than grid size, I++, and then I'll do a double for loop here. I'm just doing the first thing that comes to mind. You could probably do this a different way if you wanted to. Well, let's just go ahead and do J. And so that's going to loop through a 4x4 grid with I and J. And then for every time that we loop through the row, in fact, it's probably better to name these like row. So it's kind of more intuitive, like what we're looking at. So for every row, and then this could be called column, we basically want to create a wrapper and push it into this section here. So there's a couple things you want to do off the bat. I'm going to go ahead and keep track of the sections. So I'm going to say document.get element by tag name, and I think I could just pass it section here. But luckily we only have one, and I might want to console log that to make sure it works properly, but I think it should be good. But like I said, for every row you want to create a wrapper. So I'll say const wrapper is equal to document.create element. And I believe I can pass this a div. So it takes in a tag name, so I can say div. And then for the wrapper, class list dot add, I'm gonna go ahead and add a wrapper. And then I'm gonna loop through the column. So for every column, you need to push into the wrapper. So I'm gonna go ahead and say a const tile is equal to document create element div tile.classList.add tile. And now we've created the wrapper, we've created the tiles, but we need a way to push them into the correct wrapper. So I'm going to say wrapper.append child or append. I don't know if it matters which one you use. I knew at one point, but I've already forgotten. I'll just do append child. It should work fine. I think one of them only works for like actual DOM elements, and the other one works for like text nodes and stuff. So I'll say append child, and then I want to append the wrapper to the page, right? So I'm going to say section.append child wrapper. So now number of tiles is actually going to be dynamic based on grid size. So I'm going to move this down here, and I'm going to say grid size squared, like so. All right, so now I should be creating this wrapper thing. Section append child is not a function. Get elements by tag name. I think I should have said get element by tag name and make sure this works. Get element by tag name is not a function. Okay, so there's only get elements by tag name, and there should only be one section on the page, so I think I could do something like this maybe. There we go. So now what I was trying to show is that like I could simply make this grid as dynamic as I wanted to. I can make this 7, and then we'll get a huge grid of all this stuff that I can click through. That's obviously going to be way too much to click through, so I'll keep it as like 3. Okay. But now as I click through my grid, like my logic should still work the same way, and I have the code dynamically driving the content on the page. Okay. So it's all based on your business needs and the use cases of your application. But we can actually clean this code up a little bit further probably to make it more declarative if you wanted to. So in this section, maybe just wrap it in a function. I can say function setup grid, like so. And I'm just going to go ahead and move all this code here. And then down here, I'm going to make another function called setup click listeners, like so. Now, does this really help the code base that much? I don't know. But I think it kind of makes it easier to read if you make functions that kind of declare what you're doing on the page and then you call them. So setup grid, setup click listener. So so when you first look at this file, like potentially you could just kind of close these and you can read through the code and kind of understand what's going on. And if you wanted to make this even more dynamic, like you can make these more pure functions in a sense, right? Grid size could be passed in, like so. And then setup grid could take in a 3 here. And then for setup click listeners, let's go ahead and look through here and see like what things was this pulling from. So clicked tiles. Technically, this thing could be scoped here. Like you can use a closure and just scope this here if you wanted to. It could be a bad approach. I don't know. But if you don't need to use click tiles anywhere else in this code, then maybe just scope it here. And then what else? Number of tiles. So that needs to take in the grid size times 2. So I'll just go ahead and say like grid size. And now I think what we could do is like declare grid size here as a constant, and then I'm going to go ahead and pass it in for both of those. All right, so this is the only thing that needs to care about section. All right, so again, is this cleaner? I don't know. You can decide. You can be the judge of that. But from a glance, when you first open this file, you can easily see, okay, I'm defining a grid of 3. I set up that grid, and then I set up the click listeners. And you could probably dive in further and make this more like generic or clean. But for the most part, I think we're pretty good. Like maybe this could be an option that's passed in. So like I could just put like a delay here and default it to 300. And then I can use that here. So if I wanted to just dynamically change the delay to make it super fast, I could just do it here. And it might even make more sense to have setup grid return an array of DOM elements, and then setup click listener is the one that's like listening for a particular class or something. But I don't know. I'm not gonna waste too much time on doing all this. So now I can actually like click on this and it's gonna go through real quick. And the code is just a little bit easier to manage and maintain. And you can kind of keep doing this further and further and further until you have really generic functions if you want to. But I hope this was a good little overview of how to solve that problem. And I hope you guys enjoyed watching it. Like always, if you want to ask me questions directly or be part of a community of other people learning how to code, feel free to join my Discord and ask questions there. And other than that, have a good day and happy coding.